I'm sure that most people who are listening or looking at this video, you've probably heard of cholesterol. Cholesterol is a lot of people associate it with heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and cholesterol has earned a bad reputation, but it's basically a misnomer to consider cholesterol bad, because you have to consider that your cell membranes are composed of cholesterol. A large part of your brain is composed of cholesterol, and cholesterol is a raw material that produces many hormones in the body, including both testosterone and estrogen, as well as cortisol. In fact, the word steroid, basically, if you look at it from a biochemical definition, it basically means derived from cholesterol, because the basic backbone of a steroid molecule is cholesterol. Cholesterol, for example, let's take testosterone. Cholesterol travels to the testes, carried through by a carrier in the blood called low-density lipoprotein, or LDL. The LDL delivers cholesterol to the testes. Then certain other carriers take over, and what happens is you get 5 enzymatic steps that are dictated by another hormone called what's it called again? Luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland. Basically controls the enzymatic conversion, starting with pregnenolone, which converts cholesterol into testosterone. So now let me turn off this phone. Geez, I don't want to get any calls here. Anyway, forgot to turn off my phone, but I'm just going to ignore it if anyone calls, so don't worry about it. So anyway, so cholesterol is very important. Unfortunately, cholesterol can't really be carried in the blood in a free state. It has to attach onto something. And the two main carriers is various intermediaries, very low density lipoprotein, blah, blah, blah. Triglycerides are basically refer to fat carried in the blood. You might have seen that if you ever taken a lab test. They have a listing for total cholesterol, then LDL, low density lipoprotein, and then HDL cholesterol, which is high density lipoprotein. But cholesterol needs to be carried by something in the blood. The main cholesterol carrier is LDL, or low density lipoprotein. The problem with LDL, which is often referred to as the bad cholesterol, which is again, a misrepresentation of science. LDL isn't really bad. It's only bad under certain circumstances. LDL is actually very good for you. Without LDL, none of us would be able to make testosterone, because, as I said, LDL carries the cholesterol to the parts of the body, for instance, the testes, the Leydig cells, where testosterone is manufactured. LDL goes bad when it's oxidized. When it's oxidized, it becomes a whole different animal, and there it's associated with the development and progression of atherosclerosis, which is a buildup of plaque in the arteries, which is closely associated with the onset of cardiovascular disease, including myocardial infarctions, heart attack, and stroke, right? Now, the thing is, the body, nature always provides antidotes. I mean, if you've been studying science and medicine as long as I have, and nutrition, you find that nature always seems to provide antidotes. And in the case of LDL, the antidote is, well, it's twofold. There's ways to control LDL by diet. You don't want to eat a lot of sugar. But the actual main, let's say, yin to LDL's yang is high-density lipoprotein. And high-density lipoprotein is also manufactured in the liver, as is LDL. And you could say that HDL, as it's called, high-density lipoprotein, HDL, there's different subclasses, HDL1, HDL2, and so on. You could say that HDL acts as a kind of a scavenger of cholesterol. In a process called reverse cholesterol transport, HDL circulates in the blood and actually picks up excess excess cholesterol, and locks onto it, carries it back to the liver, almost like a garbage man picks up trash, carries it back to the liver, where the liver incorporates the cholesterol into the production of bile salts. And then the bile salts can be, they're stored in the gallbladder, but a large amount of bile salts are excreted. And this is the only way the body can get rid of cholesterol, because cholesterol, unlike fat and carbohydrates, it can't be burned. This is the only way you can get rid of it. So as a consequence, HDL has earned the reputation over the years of being highly protective for cardiovascular disease. Strangely enough, though, recent research, they used to say that the higher your HDL level, the more protection you have against cardiovascular disease. But in recent years, they found that people with extremely high levels of HDL, something like 95 or over, are actually more prone to heart disease for reasons that are too complex to get into this video, but I will be talking about it in my upcoming article on HDL and LDL in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. But suffice to say that having, let's say, fairly higher than normal levels of HDL is protective. You might have heard one of the ways to increase HDL is exercise. Aerobic exercise in particular increases HDL. Losing body fat increases it. Anytime you lose body fat, your HDL is automatically going to go up, which means you have more protection against cardiovascular disease. Drinking some alcohol, like 2 glasses of red wine a day, will also increase HDL. All that has lately come into contention too, because some studies indicate that the type of HDL increased by drinking alcohol is not as, let's say, active as other forms of HDL, for example, the type increased by exercise. But again, that's a whole different topic that I'll get into in my article about HDL that's going to be in Applied Metabolics. So you know now the functions of HDL, but what are actually good HDL levels according to lab tests? Well, the American Heart Association, they suggest an ideal HDL level is 60 milligrams per deciliter of blood. Your HDL is considered low if it's below 40. You should aim to have an HDL level between 40 and 60, but over 60 milligrams is optimal unless you start to get super high, like 95, where it's kind of like reverses itself. Again, as I talk about in Applied Metabolics all the time, this is another example of hormesis, which is a process that basically means a substance or an activity is good up to a certain point, but if you go past that point, the effects reverse and it now becomes negative or deleterious to health. Now, interesting thing about HDL, for those of you, anybody listening to this or watching this who uses oral anabolic steroids, oral anabolic steroids, you might know that the biggest danger with oral anabolic steroids is that they are structured, they're basically synthetic forms of testosterone, but whereas testosterone is broken down rapidly in the liver, because of let's say the structural manipulations of oral anabolic steroids, they tend to accumulate in the liver. And as they accumulate in the liver, they stimulate an enzyme that breaks down HDL. So what this means in practical terms, if you take oral anabolic steroids, your HDL level is going to drop considerably. I've seen lab tests of champion bodybuilders where like I say, the average, a good HDL level is, let's say, 60. These guys have HDL levels of 5 or less. Now, theoretically, a doctor might look at that and say, hey, buddy, you're at a very high risk for heart attacks. I would argue that they are not, and I'll tell you why. Because even though they have HDL levels, there's a couple of things to consider. First of all, the HDL levels are temporary. They're caused by the oral steroids stimulating the enzyme in the liver that breaks down HDL prematurely. And that's a temporary effect because when they get off the steroids, the HDL levels usually go way up. Most bodybuilders, even in the off season, don't let themselves get really fat. They tend to be lean, and having a lean body is associated with higher HDL levels. So that's the first thing to consider. The other thing to consider is that you have to look at the big picture of blood lipid levels. Besides HDL, you have LDL, and you have total cholesterol, and you have triglycerides. Those are the basic lipids that they check for in lab tests. Let's say I have a bodybuilder who has a HDL level of 5, very bad, let's say, right? But let's say he has because of his diet, he doesn't eat a lot of carbs, doesn't eat a lot of fat. They'll have a cholesterol level of 140 or less. Very rarely over 150, and according to Nathan Pritikin, this guy from the Pritikin Institute, I'm not going to get into detail, but they figured out that if you have a total cholesterol level of 150 or less, your body is not laying down cholesterol in the arteries. So that's the one thing to consider. Bodybuilders, again, because they don't eat a lot of sugar and junk, their triglyceride levels are low. That's significant because triglycerides are a precursor for the synthesis of LDL, and as I said, they have low body fat. So all of these things tend to neutralize the low HDL level that you see in bodybuilders who take oral steroids. And the thing is, but this clearly does not apply to the average person who's not a bodybuilder, who's not an athlete, and who does not have, let's say, extremely low body fat levels. For those people, having a low HDL is very dangerous, because especially if your LDL level is also elevated. Now, I should say, if a bodybuilder goes crazy on steroids, takes a bunch of oral steroids, takes a bunch of injectable steroids, what that's going to do, that's going to raise their LDL level. Now they're getting into a dangerous territory, because now they have the combination of low HDL and elevated LDL. Now they're at much more of a risk of having a heart attack. This probably explains why it's rare and it doesn't happen that often. Some bodybuilders, the biggest, let's say, the most dangerous side effect of steroids has been heart attacks, and this is now the reason why. Low HDL, high LDL for an extended amount of time, and that's what causes it. Now, the thing is, there's ways nutritionally, besides exercise, drinking a little bit of alcohol, maintaining low body fat levels. You can also, for example, the nutrient niacin. Niacin actually is better than most drugs at raising HDL levels. Of course, the bad side effect of niacin is when you take doses large enough to raise HDL, which would be 1,000 milligrams a day or more, you get what they call the niacin flush, which is caused by a release of histamine in the skin that rapidly dilates the blood vessels right under the skin and imparts a feeling of heat and itchiness in the skin. They call it the niacin flush. A lot of people don't like that. You can avoid that by, before you're taking the niacin, you drink a 12-ounce glass of water. Or actually, you can drink the water after you get the flush. If you drink the water when the flush comes on, the water will knock out the flush. Another option is to take an aspirin tablet before you take the niacin. Aspirin itself has anti-heart attack effects by preventing platelet aggregation. I'm not going to get into that either. But let's talk about how food affects cholesterol or HDL cholesterol. The things that increase HDL. Now this is interesting. With low carbohydrate diets or ketogenic diets, a common criticism is that they contain a lot of fat. Ketogenic diets, for example, which are characterized by having 20 grams of carbohydrate a day or less, that's it. You replace the carbohydrate with high fat, and very often it's saturated fat. Saturated fat, most cardiologists and the American Heart Association, that's poison, they'll tell you, when it comes to heart disease. That's not true. That's based on old, outdated research. But besides that fat, what they're overlooking is that one of the things that raises HDL is fat. In fact, when you go on a low-fat, high-carb diet, your LDL level goes up and your HDL level goes down, strangely enough. Believe it or not, having a little more body fat actually, in some cases, increases HDL. But other things, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. Having body fat decreases HDL. Again, being sedentary, not exercise, decreases HDL. Type 2 diabetes decreases HDL. Any inflammation in your body, like older people tend to get systemic inflammation, that decreases HDL. Smoking decreases HDL. Some certain hormones increase HDL. Estrogen, interesting thing. Now, let's say you're on testosterone replacement therapy, and the only form of testosterone you're taking is testosterone. Let's say you take an injectable testosterone, right? And let's say your doctor, he's worried about estrogen because some studies suggest that higher estrogen levels are associated with the onset of prostate cancer. Not testosterone, but higher levels of estrogen. Some doctors will prescribe, along with the testosterone, they'll prescribe a aromatase inhibitor drug, such as Arimidex. Aromatase is the enzyme that converts androgens such as testosterone into estrogen. Now, taking that drug with the testosterone will limit the estrogen, there's no question, but The reason why testosterone injections normally don't have negative effects on cardiovascular health is because some of that testosterone, this is what happens normally in the body with the testosterone made every day by men, a certain amount of testosterone is converted into estrogen every day in men's body. And when you take testosterone injections, some of that testosterone is also converted to estrogen, and it's the estrogen that maintains the HDL levels and helps prevent cardiovascular disease. So if you take an aromatase inhibitor like Arimidex with a testosterone injection, you're now removing the protective effects of estrogen that are inherent in the testosterone, which means now the testosterone could actually produce adverse cardiovascular effects. That is a controversy right now. Some studies say it does, some studies say it doesn't, but when cardiovascular complications do arise from testosterone, it's usually more related to an increase in blood clotting rather than higher estrogen levels. Thyroid hormone also increases HDL levels, and conversely, having a low thyroid output or hypothyroidism decreases HDL levels. As I mentioned earlier, exercise and alcohol also are associated with higher HDL levels. What are the best foods if you wanted to raise HDL levels? Extra virgin olive oil, one of the best. It lowers inflammation. As I said earlier, excess inflammation in the body is associated with lower HDL levels. There was a study a couple of years ago which really freaked me out when I saw it. I mean, they had these subjects completely got rid of saturated fat in the diet, and they substituted extra virgin olive oil. I don't remember how long the study went on, but the startling thing about the study was in these subjects that completely obliterated all fat from the diet except for extra virgin olive oil, their risk of cardiovascular disease, including heart attacks, decreased. Are you ready for this? 93%. I don't know if the study was ever duplicated, because the way science works, for something to be accepted in science, it has to be duplicated in other studies several times. One study is not considered enough to prove a point, but it's just mind-boggling if that's true, that olive oil could have. But in reality, nobody could really live entirely on olive oil as the sole source of fat. But it's good to know that olive oil itself can raise HDL levels. Any type of fiber, especially soluble fibers such as found in fruits, beans, and legumes, that type of food can also raise HDL levels. So you can include that. Don't believe the nonsense about these foods containing. I can't even remember this I can't remember what it's called, but there's been books written about how beans and legumes contain this I can't remember. I just wrote an article about it. Contain this anti-nutrient and cause all kinds of problems. That only exists in raw beans and legumes. If you cook the beans and legumes, you're safe. Just don't eat them raw. You'll be fine. Soluble fiber. You can also get soluble fiber from oatmeal. Soluble fiber will raise your HDL cholesterol. Again, relating to fiber, whole grains, which also has a bad reputation. Some people say that because of the gluten content, it can cause all kinds of health problems. I'm not going to go into that, but let's just say that it's kind of overhyped, this gluten situation. But whole grains have been shown in studies to also help to raise HDL levels. Again, fruit, because of the fiber content, fruits that are rich in fibers, such as prunes, apples, pears, they will lower your HDL level and raise your lower your LDL level and raise your HDL level at the same time. Any kind of fatty fish, because of the omega-3 fatty acids, they're not so great at raising HDL, but they are good at raising LDL. So that in effect is not quite as great as raising HDL and LDL and lowering LDL, but just the fact that the fatty fish lowers LDL is a definite heart protective effect. Fatty fish include salmon, mackerel, albacore, tuna, sardines, rainbow trout, halibut, and anchovies. These are all fatty fish. They'll lower your LDL level. Flaxseed oil contains alpha-linoleic acid, which is a precursor to the preformed omega-3 fatty acids of EPA and DHA. Flax also it will help to raise HDL levels. Nuts, any kind of nuts will help. A lot of people, bodybuilders, a lot of people worry about the calorie content of nuts because if they're, some of them contain like as much as 76% fat. But remember, fat raises HDL. Fat raises, any kind of fat raises HDL. So because nuts are high in fat, they will raise HDL levels. But an interesting thing about it, recent studies show that when you eat nuts, as much as half of the amount you eat passes through your body undigested. So theoretically, nuts are very high in calories because of the calorie content. Because they're not totally digestible, you're not getting the calories as reflected, let's say in books and charts. You're getting far less calories than you think. That doesn't apply to ground nuts like peanut butter and stuff like that. There you're getting the full calories. Each tablespoon of peanut butter has 120 calories and it's 76% fat. So peanut butter, if you go crazy on that, it could make you fat as a house. I know from experience. So avocado it contains monounsaturated fat, the same kind of fat that's found in extra virgin olive oil. That lowers HDL and reduces your risk of stroke, heart attack, and cardiovascular disease. Soy products. I think I did a recent study. I did an article on soy, and I also did a video on soy. Soy is not quite as bad as people think. Soy tends to raise HDL levels. You don't want to go crazy on soy because if you eat too much soy, it can interfere with thyroid output, especially the first 3 months. And as far as the testosterone, that only happens if you eat massive amounts of soy. Having 25 grams of soy protein is not going to adversely affect testosterone at all. As I mentioned earlier, a little bit of red wine, 2 glasses a day, will raise your HDL cholesterol. Again, there's a controversy because again, there's different subclasses of HDL. The larger forms, what they call larger forms of HDL, are more protective against heart disease. The red wine raises HDL, but it raises the smaller versions, which aren't quite as protective, but still offers some protection. Again, one of the best things you can do if you want to raise your HDL is be active, always move. Don't sit around. Do some exercise. Go on a diet. Again, any fat you lose, as your fat goes down, your HDL level automatically goes up. Some people have genetic problems with HDL. That might require some medical help. I think that's about it for HDL. In this video. But as I said, I will be writing a huge article upcoming in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. That's www.appliedmetabolics.com. I'm going to include many other factors related to HDL and LDL and health that I couldn't go into this video, because if I did, the video would be several hours long. And as a side note, I've been looking at YouTube lately, and I see these guys are putting on I guess they call them podcasts. They're putting on these videos that go for 2.5, 3 hours. I personally don't know how anyone has the time to watch that. I mean, some of them are interesting subjects, but who the hell wants to listen to some guy drone on for 3 hours? I mean, come on. Somebody might say, well, you watch it in parts. Well, again, still, it takes time to watch all that stuff. I mean, and as I've said in past videos, they've done research showing that the human attention span for videos maximizes at 20 minutes. Now, right now, I'm a little over 24 minutes. So I'm going to end this video by just saying, if you want more information on nutrition, exercise science, hormonal therapy, anti-aging research you can use today, fat loss techniques that really work, women's health and fitness, ergogenic aids, hormonal therapy. Nobody covers as many topics as I do. Subscribe today to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. When you subscribe, I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page. See how fast I'm talking to make sure I try not to talk too long. That's only for current subscribers. Each day I put new information on nutrition, exercise science, and medicine on my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page. I also have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics webpage where current subscribers only can send me short questions about anything they want, whether they read it in Applied Metabolics newsletter or something else that's on their mind. As long as they're short, don't require 10-page answers, I'll answer them. But again, you have to be a current subscriber. I'm not going to answer unsolicited questions. Same goes for the comments under these videos. I'm not going to, you're welcome to leave comments or possible suggestions for future videos. I'm open to that. If I feel that enough people have an interest in the topic, that's suggested, I'll be happy to try and do a video about it. What else can I say? My newsletter, 40 to 50 pages, no ads, most comprehensive writing on nutrition and exercise science I've ever seen, if I say so myself. I've seen just most of the digital publications that write about it. They're great. There's nothing wrong. I'm not going to say they're bad. Of course, most of them are cost 3 times more than my newsletter, and they're like 1/3 the size at best. But that's besides the point. And also they're written by people that are not writers. And I'm not trying to sound arrogant here, but it shows. In other words, their writing is one of the tenets of good writing is to entertain and inform. Now these guys inform, meaning a lot of these guys are, they have PhDs and they have degrees in physiology or whatever. They know their stuff, but they don't present it well. They're used to, they've written theses, they've written scientific papers. They don't know how to communicate with the public, so they come off as dry and thick. In other words, to get through their writing, you have to have a deep interest. Otherwise, you're going to fall asleep and become glassy-eyed after the first 3 or 4 sentences. My newsletter is written because I wrote for magazines for 40 years. I know how to write for the public. I try to keep it entertaining and informative. I have a lot of anecdotes about training with Arnold in the old days. I try to keep it entertaining and informative. If you check it out, I think you'll find that's true. www.appliedmetabolics.com. Thank you for listening. And if you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, adopt a dog. I forgot to bring Bruno in the video, but I'll bring him in the next video. Okay? Take care. Thank you.